Okay, right now I'm just going to provide a brief explanation of the business cycle. Um, One way to think about a business cycle is simply as a fluctuation around some long run trend. Okay, and that trend we call potential GDP. Now, what is potential GDP? It's simply a constant rate of increase or constant expansion of the economy over some long period of time. Say, 50 years, 100 years, 150 years. So if we were to graph GDP and specifically real GDP. Okay, so we've already discussed how to calculate real GDP. It's simply GDP using some base year price level. Back in 1900 and let's mark off, say, 1950 and say 19 or say the year 2000 and then say today, which is 2015. Well, in 1950, we were a larger economy than we were in 1900. In the year 2000, we were a larger economy than we were in 1950 and in 1900. And in 2015, we're arguably a larger economy than we were in the year 2000, than we were in the year 1950, and than we were in the year 1900. In other words, over time, our economy expands at a relatively constant rate, and that is potential GDP. Okay, and sometimes we call that long run GDP. Okay, now the economy, however, even though follows this sort of long run linear path over time, um, uh, fluctuates around this path from year to year. And that's what we call the business cycle. And it fluctuates something like this. Okay? And so what we have here then is the economy growing, contracting, growing, and contracting, growing, contracting, all oscillating around this potential GDP or this long run trend. Um, Now, obviously, since the long run trend is upward sloping, it must therefore be the case that the expansions outweigh, so to speak, the contractions, or otherwise we wouldn't get a continually expanding economy. But now to talk about different sections of this change in real GDP uh, as it fluctuates around the trend. The top of this fluctuation we call a peak. The bottom of this fluctuation we call a trough. Okay, now our economy currently is expanding. Where would that be? Well, let's disregard the time, the actual years here. But if our economy is in expansion mode, that would be a period whereby the business cycle is expanding, or this line has a positive slope. Okay, so any of these areas would be called expansion. We would say the economy is expanding. Okay, Now, sometimes, however, the economy contracts, okay? In other words, we have negative rates of short-run growth, okay? We had one back in 2008, in fact, where the economy actually contracted and growth rates were negative. That would be a period such as this, where the business cycle, real GDP, this wavy line has a negative slope. We'll call those contractions. Okay. What the economy does then in the short run, okay, in the long run, the economy forever expands. But in the short run, the economy expands, it contracts and expands and it contracts, etc. Okay, it's the economy improves, gets worse, improves, gets worse, improves, gets worse. Now, expansionary periods are typically characterized by lower levels of unemployment. Okay, in other words, unemployment is falling when the economy is expanding in general. Contractionary periods are periods of higher unemployment. Okay, so unemployment is rising as the economy contracts to the trough. Okay, unemployment in general is at its lowest near the peak. Unemployment in general is at its highest near the trough. Okay? During expansionary periods, inflation, in other words, a year-to-year change in the price level, tends to be higher than inflation in the contractionary periods. Okay, so again, during expansions, prices tend to rise. During contractions, prices either don't rise as much or they can even fall. Now, one characteristic about this contractionary period, or the length of this contractionary period, if the economy contracts, or in other words, has negative short-run growth rates for at least 2 quarters, okay, we call that a recession. Okay, we call that a recession. Okay, so again, if the economy contracts for at least 2 quarters, we call that a recession. Okay, and this is the business cycle in a nutshell.